Hey, I'll start recording.
Okay, thank you. So the topic of the week is the idea of progress, modernity, nostalgia. And we should have read 3 readings, and I understand that you could have read only 2 of them, Svetlana Boym's chapter from her book, The Future of Nostalgia, and Marshall Sahlins' chapter on the original Affluent Society. I used to assign this article from The Economist, which is called The Idea of Progress, Why is the Modern View of Progress So Impoverished? It was an editorial which was published in 2009. It used to be available to the public, but I think since this year, they've archived it and made it unavailable to the public. So let's talk about the idea of progress and modernization. So the progress, you understand the meaning, right? The idea that the advances in technology, sciences, and social organization can produce an improvement in the human condition. And also the progress has to do with the idea of history, right? That the humanity is progressing, that life is getting better, that, like in the past, people were, life was horrible, people were killing each other, people were not as humane as they are now, but now as we advance, we progress, so that the life is getting better, life is getting more comfortable, the quality of life is getting higher, and overall the people are getting, let's say, adopting more humanistic attitudes towards each other, and humanity is getting better. There are some doubts about this idea, about modernization, like first the doubts about the idea that progress is really happening, because progress can also bring good things, but it can also bring horrible things, like or some things that we saw as modern and improving our lives after a period of time becomes unmodern, or something that's not good. Remember when we were discussing tradition and modernity, I was talking about the coal economy, right? At a certain point, like in the beginning of the 20th century, or starting earlier from the 19th century in Western Europe, and in our part of the world, maybe starting from the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, it was the idea that the coal is a great, coal, steel, and production of coal is a great idea to build a modern economy. As well as, so coal was used for heating, and it's still being used in Kazakhstan for heating. But nowadays, the attitudes towards coal have changed, right? The coal economy is not considered clean, right? As a fuel, coal is not considered clean, it's considered a source of pollution, and it's becomes problematic for many cities, particularly in Kazakhstan, where our coal stations are based on, the coal station, like TETs, the coal stations that gives the heating to the whole city, are usually coal-based, right? And for instance, nowadays gas is considered, like cleaner fuel, and other types of, energies are considered to be clean. So this is one sort of downside, that modernization something that's considered modern at a certain point of time then can become sort of no longer modern after a period of so. Then so the idea of modernity is also not stable, right? It's also changing with, then what is modernization? Does it always equal growth and economic development? So does it always mean more production, like more goods, that we have to produce more, like that we have to, if previously, I don't know, like people produced, I don't know, certain amount of, let's say, wheat and other products. Now they have to produce more and more. Does it mean that, like, in Kazakhstan, we often talk about modernization and development, but what does it mean? And there are sometimes, like, we develop the benchmarks, like, for instance, modernization was considered in the, like, if we talk about the city life, with the space to live, right? Like, it was the ideal that, for instance, for Astana, that every resident of Astana has a 20 square meters space to live. So I guess everybody has to have his own separate room, and it's improves the quality of his life. In rural conditions, it's you know, clean water. It's also, we often talk about flushing toilets, right? The running water, all of these things that make life more comfortable and modern. But of course, like, with all of these things, there is a price, right? There is a price for ecology. Like, in Kazakhstan, we don't have enough water. So, like, when somebody says, why we don't have, like, when you drive from Almaty to Astana and you stop somewhere near Agadir, and you cannot have a flushing toilet in Agadir because there is no water. Water has to be brought, and it requires lots of energy and so on to bring water and make it flush. So these are the, you know, modernization is not something that everybody agrees on, right? And it used to be connected more with material things, and still is. When we talk about modernization, we mainly mean material things, right? And that's also problematic, right? That when we talk about only material things and not talk about other spheres of life that are important for humanity. So some, you know, important facts that the people who, historians who subscribe to the idea that the, you know, like, history is progressing and humanity is progressing, bring to the fore, like, for instance, the growth of the average income, right? For centuries, like, people lived on a small income, like the way we live now, like princes and dukes and, you know, khans of the early ages did not live like we do today in terms of the material comforts that we can afford. Average age has grown dramatically, right? Nowadays, the average age of people is 65. In countries such as, in developed countries, it's over 80. Child death has become mercifully rare outside Africa. The global rate of literacy is comfortably above 8 out of 10. And in Kazakhstan, we have almost universal literacy, for instance. There is a book by Steven Pinker, which is called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which argues that the violence has subsided over the period of modern age, starting from the 18th century. And oftentimes he says that despite the fact that people say that the 20th century has seen the most violent wars of the First World War and the Second World War, but after the Second World War, the violence has dramatically subsided. So you can, like, this is something, if you're interested, you can read. And violence, state violence has subsided, like interpersonal, community violence, and so on. Military violence, even though, like, there are some dirty wars, but it's no longer accepted as normal. And you can see it from, you know, like, the disappearance of the capital punishment, like, humanization of any punishment, and so on, like concerns about humanistic side of things. So, but there are still some doubts about progress, right? This 20th century, it has not only seen the great wars of the First World War I and World War II, but it also seen the government's violence towards its people, right? then there is this weak correlation between happiness and GDP, right? So sometimes if you are people, it's often found that people in the rich countries are also not happy about their lives. They're particularly not happy about the so-called relative deprivation. So even though, like in America, like people are not starving and you know, nobody is starving to death and so on, but there is poverty, right? And it comes not from like sort of material understanding of poverty. I mean, these people, they have things to eat and so on, but from the social and like relative deprivation, that people are poor compared to other people, and they consider themselves poor. Ecological disasters that modernization has brought, known, forests are disappearing, the ice is melting, social bonds are crumbling, privacy is eroding, like the famous example of how technology can be used to kill people. It's not Nazi gas chambers. Nuclear power and nuclear weapons could be used against humanity's biological contamination. Internet was seen as a great technological advancement and a vehicle of democracy and communication, but it also spread pornography, crime, conspiracy theories, and bullying. So there are, as I said, different ideas of the advancement of progress, right? That the humanity is advancing on the path of progress, and then there are some doubts about the advancement of humanity on the path of progress. That it's not like a прямая дорога в светлое будущее. Like there are often, like there are downsides that come with the ideas of the, you know, improvement and great future and светлое будущее. And there is also the accompanying feeling of progress and modernity that we read in Svetlana Boym's book, Nostalgia, right? And we read the chapter called From Cured Soldiers to Incurable Romantics, Nostalgia and Progress. And the term was coined by the Swiss doctor in his dissertation in the end of the 17th century. And he noticed this disease that he called nostalgia in his own compatriots from Switzerland. And I guess he discovered it because he could relate to his compatriots and he could understand what they feel. And he particularly noticed that from the force of sound of nostalgia to define the sad mood coming from the desire for return to one's native land. So you hear some song, you hear some sounds, and you know, like your heart starts breaking. And I just wanted to bring you some of the songs that he's talking about that brought nostalgia then, and maybe continue to bring nostalgia today. Do you see the YouTube video that I'm showing?
No.
So this sound that I'm is called yodeling. Yodel, yo, it's kind of an ancient folk music of places in Switzerland and Bavaria, so that is the alpine music. Okay, let me try to share it. New share. Do you see now the YouTube video?
Yes.
So you get an idea. So this kind of folk group sitting like in a pristine, rustic, alpine area and singing these folk songs. And these are the songs that were also familiar to the Swiss soldiers and other Swiss people walking abroad in the 18th and 19th century. And then, like the time that we're talking about, when the Swiss doctor discovered the nostalgia in his own compatriots, Switzerland, it was not like a developed country like we think of it now. It was kind of a backwater in Europe, place where, you know, poor peasants would go to, I know, work, would be recruited for imperial armies in France and Prussia and go to work in, you know, households elsewhere. So it was a place from where people would migrate. But you get the idea, right? How like nostalgia is a nostalgia for a place, right? Nostalgia for the life, the way of life, and nostalgia for the experience that cannot be repeated. So I want to bring a similar. This song is actually this sort of yodeling group. It's very popular, by the way. So I'm looking at this video and it has like 6 million views on YouTube. So a similar nostalgic song from our own land. I'll play now. Okay, so you get an idea of the song. Let me turn to presentation. So nostalgia, as we've seen from Nurlan Abdilgin's song, he's nostalgic for a place, right? Where his childhood passed and he comes and he's feeling nostalgic, but there is no possibility for him to return. And of course, it could be discussed like why he cannot return, because he's there, right? He comes to this place, but this experience of his cannot be repeated, and for some reason he cannot return to this actual place, which does exist, some like Aul outside Almaty, right? So nostalgia is never a native but a displaced person who mediates between the local and the universal. So in this way, like Nurlan Abdilgin as a lyrical character in the song is also a displaced person, a person who is displaced from his native village to Almaty, and he comes and he feels nostalgic and he cannot return, but he cannot return. And this sort of, it's very important, the impossibility to return, right? And why there is no possibility to return? because of the progress. Because the progress is one line to the future, and life is changing, and life is supposed to get better and better and better, even though, of course, there are some failures. And when particular, like for instance, in the post-Soviet time, when people expected the future, but the better future, but it didn't happen. So the better future was cancelled. So it has to do with the changing idea of time and sort of what she calls shrinking space of experience. When the past experience no longer fits the horizon of the future expectation. So he comes to this village, he see like how children play in the village, how like village organizes, you know, songs and weddings and so on. And he is nostalgic because this experience, like in his current life and his future life, there will no longer be such an experience. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. I can be nostalgic for a time when my father and I, for instance, were driving Zhiguli and going to some long car trip somewhere in Kazakhstan, right? My father is deceased, but even if he was alive, we could not repeat this experience because, for instance, Zhiguli is no longer a cool car, right? Nowadays you have to have, I know, Toyota or some other, you know, Mitsubishi and other cars in order to be like this cool and in order to, so this experience of getting on that road, on that car could not be repeated because, you know, everything is changing and what we had in the past is not going to happen in the future again, which is different from how people lived previously in agrarian societies, where they experienced time differently. The time was cyclical, so цикличная жизнь, цикличное время. So, and these cycles would repeat like everyday cycle, you know, I wake up, Oyanam, shai koyam, sir sawam, mal shagaram, and it will repeat. Then it repeats seasonally, right? Every season, like we do the same thing. And then it also repeats through life cycles. And it also, one could expect that, you know, I'm herding, like, там, я пасу 500 овец, да, но мой сын даже, он тоже будет пасти овец, у него может вырасти стадо, там будут, наверное, 2000 овец или это, но, в принципе, он будет заниматься тем же, и его опыт выпаса овец будет похож на мой опыт, его опыт жизни будет похож на мой опыт, и поэтому как бы люди могли представлять, что их ожидает в будущем, и что в будущем их ожидает повторение, да, того, что уже было, и как бы это придавало им веры в будущее. Ну или не веры, а как бы знания о том, что будет в будущем, like some ideas of what is expect and what could be in the future. Now with the idea of progress, when the times become so-called linear время, time, so, and the experience is shrinking, so we're all, and particularly with the globalization, all of our experiences are becoming one, right? Like we wear the same things, we, in the cities, like the city life in Astana, maybe not that different from the city life somewhere in Shenzhen, in China, and Dubai, and you know, our shopping experiences in the shopping malls are the same. We studied this sort of Astana mega mall. So, and the uniqueness of everybody's experience is shrinking, right? So there is no longer this unique experience, and you're afraid that they, like what I've experienced in the past, it will no longer be in the future. And that's why there is this anxiety, and that's why there is this nostalgia. That's why I have this nostalgia for the time when I was driving with my father's Zhiguli, because Zhiguli is no longer there, because the road is no longer such a road, right? Because everything that, like the things that we have and so on, it's all not the same. And my son, like for instance, I'm driving Mitsubishi, and I don't know, like will my son have the same experience like as me? Most likely not. Most likely I know what he would have to do, because life is supposed to get improved. So our children are supposed to live a better life than we do. At least that's was the view of the people who believed in the progress. And as I said, nowadays there are many doubts about progress. And one of the doubts about progress we can see in the Marshall Sahlins article on the original affluent society. And he introduces this counter-argument again to the idea of progress, and it concerns not agrarian society, but the society of hunter and gatherers. And he says that what we nowadays think of the society of hunter and gatherers, that they lived in poverty, that they, like quality of life was low and so on, it's not true. Even though we produce more, we are more technologically advanced, we live better, we think that we have a better quality of life than them, no. And maybe you could remember from the last lecture when we were talking about the tribe of Kayapo in the Brazilian Amazonian jungle. This in the documentary, in the National Geographic documentary, the guy who was talking about Kayapo, he was talking about the great abundance, right? Like how they had lots of fish, lots of fruits, and they hunted boars, like wild pigs, yeah? So they had meat, fish, fruits, like they could feast almost every day, and women would be gathering all these fruits and so on, and men from time to time would go and hunt. And this is the argument of Marshall Sahlins as well, that people lived well, that their nutrition was very rich. And this sort of, not nostalgia, but sort of idea that people in the Stone Age or the hunter-gatherer societies lived better, it started to resurface in the 70s with the, like paleo diet, right? That we should eat what our ancestors eat, that we should not eat carbohydrates like wheat and grain and so on, because this is a product of agricultural society, but we should eat, like fruits and meat, and, like this is, what's the name of this diet in Russian, when you eat only meat and fruits and don't eat carbohydrates. Well, I'm sure you know this kind of diet. So that's one thing. So they were eating well and they were fit, and perhaps you noticed also in the documentary about Kayapo, that Kayapo were like very fit, right? And this kind of fitness and physical exercise, it did not come with like additional cost to us. Like for instance, nowadays we see it, we study, and in order to have some physical exercise, we have to go to the gym and use electricity to on the treadmill, run, and so on. But in their lives, it sort of comes, quote unquote, naturally, like with what they do. Like they have to, when they gather and collect fruits and so on, they have to walk, they have to climb trees. When they hunt, they have to run, they have to be physically fit for this. So that's an idea about the quality of life, right? That they were eating well, they were physically fit, and also that they were they had lots of leisure time compared to us. Like nowadays we have, in order to have what we have to walk a lot, and often like we don't sleep enough, we also don't have enough leisure time and so on. But what he argues is that they walked like in the, not that they walked, I mean they didn't walk in our sense of walking, they like hunted and they collected fruits and vegetables, right? So, and it took them maybe 2-3 hours a day, right? To do, like, to procure food. And the rest of the time they were like, the rest of the time was the leisure time. And if you remember the documentary about Kayapo, you could also notice that people have lots of leisure, like they tell stories, they sort of entertain themselves, they have this very complex rituals, and they have time to have these rituals, right? And that's why and they don't have the that of the problems of the quote-unquote modern life, like no time to enjoy yourself, no time to do anything, no time to have guests, no time to, you know, like go out with people and so on. So where is this misconception about Stone Age people come from? It's from the sort of Neolithic ethnocentrism, the idea that European way of life is better, and the modern way of life is always better than any other way of life. And the difference between modern Aborigines and hunters from the time. So when people see kind of modern Aboriginals who are already kind of pushed away by the modern civilization to the most sort of deserted and so on places, with some exception of, let's say, Amazonia, but even Amazonian tropical forest is shrinking, right? Because of the development. So they don't have, I mean, they no longer live the way that they, and no longer occupy the space that used to occupy. Like when sort of European civilization came into contact with many Aboriginals, like in Americas and elsewhere, they were kind of, their space, sort of the space where they could live was shrinking, and that their way of life was also under the decline, on the decline. Freedom from material pressures, right? Like as the article says, people don't hold, people don't kind of store, right, things, which is because they know that they don't live with this idea that you have to, you know, like collect, you have to store your wealth and so on, because they don't believe in they believe in the ideal that Amazonian jungle is a land of plenty and it will always give them food, right? And it also would be a burden if they store something, but the way of life of the hunter-gatherer is that they have to be on the move, right? They, for instance, they have to move from one place to another in order to hunt and to gather. And in some ways, it's also like analogy could be drawn between the pastoral nomadism, like the way, for instance, the nomads lived, and hunter-gatherers, in the sense that there is this pressure on moving, right, from one place to another. And when you move from one place to another, you cannot accumulate all of the material things, right? Remember when Levshin was talking to one Kazakh boy, and he was asking, why do you have all of these horses? Like you have 8,000 horses as your wealth. Why don't you transfer your wealth into gold and silver and money and so on? And the Kazakh boy said something, no, like nobody would see silver and gold, but it's also the fact that like silver and gold is useless, right? If he's moving from like one step to a desert and so on, like he has to carry them, while, you know, horses, you don't have to carry horses. So these kind of the ideas of wealth, and both constitutes material wealth, were different in various societies. So he comes to some conclusions about Aboriginal hunter-gatherer lifestyles, that they had lots of time for leisure, that they had no difficulty in producing food in abundance. So they lived in the society of abundance. They didn't have this fear of poverty, right? Fear of, oh my goodness, what I'm going to eat tomorrow, like how I'm going to find a job and make money, and what I'm going to eat tomorrow. So they were enjoying a comparable ease. So that's another anthropological intervention into the idea of progress, yeah, and how we think of progress and what we think, like, okay, the progress is that now we have all of this technology, we have many goods and so on, but does it give us rich nutrition, right? Does it give us, are we staying in good shape and in good health and also, does it give us enough leisure time and the feeling of happiness, right? Are we happy to live in such a technological advanced society and stare at Zoom all day long and overall stare at computer? I hope, I imagine you can relate, you can all relate to this in the time of the quarantine. So, and maybe envy the lifestyle of the hunter and gatherers. I also want to the part on the original affluent society. The slides I used were from Anel Rahimova and Laura Razdaulletova's presentation. They're my students from the previous years. So now we have some time for Q&A. So let's talk about the ideas of progress. Do you have any questions? Ideas of progress, nostalgia, accompanying modernization and progress, and various ways of life. Did you get the nostalgia, how nostalgia is a product? Well, it's a general sort of anthropology. It's sort of an intervention. Many works of anthropologists is the intervention into this idea of progress, ideas of modernization, and these sort of imperatives that we have to modernize, we have to be this way, we have to be like technologically developed, and so on. And if you notice nowadays, there are lots of sort of the activities that are most expensive activities. It's sort of connected with the times of the hunter and gatherers. All of these trails, right? Like what people do, like people, for instance, walk the whole like walk week, right? And on Saturdays they go to, I don't know, to Kokjailau, right? And but just for a trail, right? And that's for them, it's kind of the most pleasurable thing. It's kind of the thing that gatherers did, like, I don't know, in the Stone Age, right? That would be a daily activity, like going trailing, looking for fruits and Jamesh and you know, berries and so on, going finding food in the forest and in the, or hunting, right? It's one of the most expensive, pleasurable activities, right? That only today, like the richest do to some safari trips to Africa and hunt. And it's becoming, so all of this kind of, oftentimes the activities that bring us the most pleasure are the activities that hunter-gatherers used to do. And it's used a lot in tourism and in other spheres of leisure, yeah, providing leisure for people. So the things that they were doing for work, I mean, in order to procure food, become sort of leisure activities to us, while our like work activities, we feel alienated from them. This is the Marxist word, alienation, when what you do for work does not bring you any pleasure. Is it clear? Ну, если сказать по-русски, это вот то, что считается трудом, и то, что ты делаешь, как бы должно приносить тебе моральное удовлетворение, да? И то, что вот делали охотники-собиратели, когда они охотились или там собирали фрукты, ягоды, это как бы очень труд, который приносит тебе наслаждение или удовлетворение какое-то, ты чувствуешь, это не чувствуется как работа, да, потому что это такой, как бы, не знаю, труд, который не отчужденный. Когда человек не чувствует себя винтиком в машине, допустим, да, вот известная фраза Маркса, when the person feels himself to be an appendage to the machine, right? Это вот современное, это когда мы все сидим в зуме. С одной стороны, это, конечно, достижение технологии, это, но с другой стороны, когда ты делаешь, когда в этом заключается твоя работа, да, это угнетает человека. Я не знаю, может быть, когда для охотников-собирателей, когда они там не могли что-то собрать, или это, может, они тоже чувствовали какое-то угнетение, джангл, угнетенные джунглями, но потому как это описывает маршал Sahlins, они не были так угнетены.